For as long as I can remember, I've engaged in self-regulating processes like those cited by Weston Zimmerman in Doing Gender. I used to find myself constantly monitoring my own and others' conduct with regard to its gender implications. During my childhood and adolescence, I suffered from night terrors. I remember a vaguely recognizable specter of my father standing at my door as I sat upright, sobbing in bed and telling me to man up. Fast forward 10 years, I returned to Swarthmore, to a school, after the year I came out, and was forcibly assaulted by a fellow student. Something that hadn't even been on my radar as I entered and attended classes in college suddenly reared its ugly, violent head and left me scrambling to make sense of my experience. The shame and self-loathing I felt for months afterward took a toll on my psyche. I remained silent for several months, as many survivors do, not to their fault, until I was eventually moved to report my rape. Friends of mine were generally very supportive. To my surprise, some of those who I consider my very best friends were not. My mother, who has always tried her best to be extremely supportive of me, especially since my coming out, described my telling her that I had been assaulted as my second coming out, one that was perhaps more difficult than me telling her that I was gay. Amidst much talk of how understanding she would be, I noticed signs that were quite the opposite. I internalized societal expectations by going to the gym and deciding to increase my size from the slight 135 pounds that I was standing at to something more like the 179 pounds I weigh today. That way I would feel more like I could handle this, I thought. Maybe if I looked more like a man, I would be able to handle this like a man. Around the spring of that year, I noticed that I was experiencing hot flashes and gaining weight in strange places that I hadn't before. I was perpetually drowsy and would often sleep for 6 to 8 hours in the middle of the day, despite sleeping normal hours at night. I went to my doctor, who ran a hormone panel on me, and was shocked to see that my testosterone levels were down to 26 ng/dl. Standard levels for a male my age range from about 500 to 800 ng/dl at the baseline, according to Mayo Clinic. I was extremely hypogonadal and required hormone replacement therapy at once to prevent the lasting effects of hypogonadism, from which I am now thankfully recovered. It was likely caused by one of the supplements I had used months prior to my symptoms arising, a natural testosterone booster sold at GNC, guaranteed to holistically increase testosterone levels and thereby allow for easier muscle gain. According to one of the endocrinologists I saw, the booster was likely to have contained an androgenic compound that signaled my pituitary gland to shut off testosterone production completely. In my quest to become more traditionally masculine, I saw my actions as having emasculated myself. Even through replacement, during which my levels were quite normal and my mood and other symptoms had been relatively stabilized, my parents blamed my lack of naturally occurring testosterone for the reason I was so affected by my assault. I was so hurt from it, by their point of view, simply because I was quite literally, not man enough. To many on the outside, I seemed healthier than ever before. I was stronger physically, functionally capable, and I was able to socialize in the same manner I always had been. Little did they know the very cause of my apparent increased masculinity was the end result of my assault, something my parents and much of society had effectively gendered as something that only happens to women. My grandmother, a liberal woman who had left the path of becoming a nun during her adolescence in favor of New Age spirituality, voiced her concern that perhaps the very fact that I was gay, and thus inherently less masculine than my straight male counterparts, was the reason I was raped in the first place. The summer was hell. I had incomplete work to finish over the summer. My dad, in a flurry of frustration, told me that I was using my rape as an excuse, and in my father's eyes, I had surpassed my allowed grieving period, the time during which I was allowed to feel upset by what had happened to me. Now it was time to move on and go back to being the normal me, normal, productive Parker who was on top of his academics, career prospects, and emotions. This pivotal moment in my summer, moreover my life, forced me and my family to reflect on the expectations of me as a male-identifying person and survivor of rape. Societal does not make much room for male survivors. Moreover, does it not allow for open discussion of male survivors' experiences. Since re-emerging into the world as a survivor, I have become bitterly aware of the tacit understanding that male survivors will not be as vocal as their female counterparts, the latter of which is not particularly vocal on the whole, given the shame, blame, guilt, and taboo associated with being a survivor of rape, regardless of gender. Perhaps because my newfound weight made me appear less easy to take advantage of, perhaps the fact that I had been able to successfully complete most of my classes and stay in school amidst an awful CJC case and fighting the uphill battle that was changing college policy amidst my active trial. These may have been reasons my close friends and family couldn't understand the toll that assault had taken on me, or perhaps it was just because I'm a man.